Okay, so I just want to start with a word on the scaling community of practice in which we are doing this for. So this community of practice aims to strengthen the development community's ability to design and deliver sustainable solutions that match the scale of the need. It's all constituted of volunteers, it is free, and we welcome you to register to get regular updates on relevant events, networks, and knowledge on scaling. Okay, so I think also we have a link to the website in the chat. My name is Lennart Woltering. I work for CIMMYT, the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center here in Mexico. It's a joint position with GIZ in Germany. And I'm the co-chair of the working group on agriculture. And I'm really happy to facilitate the first of our monthly working group sessions. The first one is on land restoration at scale, which is getting a lot of attention through big public and private initiatives like the Bond Challenge, the AFR 100, the 2020 in Latin America, and well, many pledges around the world to grow trees, right? So we have two presentations today, and after each one, there's room for questions and comments. No, the presentation and the Q&A will take up 25 minutes each. On the hour, we will close the topic of land degradation and dedicate an additional 15 minutes to hear from you what scaling topics are of interest to you, if there are events, products, etc., that you want to share with the community. So 1 hour of content on land degradation, on land restoration and scale, and then 15 minutes of kind of like community time. And this extra time for networking, hearing more from each other, was something that you, the members, suggested during our annual meeting last November. So I will just really jump straight into, and we start with the team of Catholic Relief Service. We have Eshan Rizvi, who's the project director and the head of CRS Agricultural Livelihoods team in Lesotho. He has more than 20 years of professional experience in agricultural livelihoods, natural resource management, and climate change. And last minute, he stepped in for Limo Likoto, scaling coordinator for Lesotho, who fell ill, and we wish her a swift restoration of her health. No? But we kick off with Olaf Westerman. He's the senior technical advisor for climate change and natural resource management at CRS, and also the co-lead of the agency's strategic change platform on livelihood and landscape restoration. Olaf has more than 20 years of experience in these topics from the CGIR, Danish Development Agency, and lately for the last 5 years with CRS. They will provide together an overview of CRS livelihood and landscape restoration strategic change platform with a deeper dive into Lesotho's integrated catchment management program. Olaf and Eshan, over to you.
Thank you, Leonard. Just struggling a bit with Zoom here, used to Team. So yeah, no, thank you very much, Leonard. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be given this opportunity to present our platform for this agricultural research and development scaling community of practice. So yeah, as the title suggests, I'll just introduce you briefly to the platform, talking a bit about the background, what, where, and how we are scaling, and not the least. And after that, Isan will dig in a bit deeper into an example from these two. So next slide, please. So in 2020, CRS defines its new agency strategy for the next 10 years called In Their Own Hands. And really to expand our reach and sustainably address the needs of the poor and also the local institutions and organizations that serve them, CRS is piloting scaling efforts for each of the 5 goal areas that you can see on the screen. And the livelihood and landscape scaling platform is situated within the goal area 3. That strives to provide all people with dignified and resilient livelihoods in flourishing landscapes. Next. So what are we scaling? So basically a common set of common principles and proven restoration models. So not something new, but proven that improve agricultural productivity and increase food security, income, and resilience. And more specifically, we are scaling 4 landscape-specific packages of interventions. So dryland regreening, which include trees on farms and also water housing techniques, watershed management, improving landscapes and reducing runoff through infrastructure development and soil and water conservation measures, water smart agriculture, which is a sequent approach that CRS has developed in Latin America to manage soil, to really manage water at plot level. And finally, multi-story agroforestry with intercrops, annual and perennial crops with a tree canopy. Next, please. So concretely, we aim to put 1.6 million hectares of land under restoration by 2030, supporting 1 million farm family to increase productivity to up to 40% on average. Can you just click again, Marius? Yeah, exactly. An important part of that reach will be through partners, such as peer organizations, governments, and the private sector. And with them, we expect to mobilize $66 million to achieve our reach. Next, please. So where do we work? So the platform is currently operating in 8 what we call target countries, 4 in a regional approach in Central America, and 4 countries in Africa. And all 4 of these restoration models are represented across these countries. So besides these target countries, we also are developing tools and methodologies for cross-learning and support to a number of non-target countries, Africa and Asia. Next, please. So how are we scaling? So our approach to scaling is through 4 strategic objectives, as we call them: innovate, expand, replicate, and collaborate. So by innovate, we mean refining these people-centered land restoration models through evidence building. By expand, we refer to coverage through ongoing or new CRS projects. Replication is really about appropriation and application by partners, peers, governments, and communities and farmers. And collaboration will be through the building and strengthening of coalitions and platforms. And Larry Cooley, from which we have developed this framework, he used the term intermediation for this coordination, facilitation, and the catalytic role that CRS can play in scaling. And these processes are not linear, but rather iterative. So with the target countries that I just mentioned, all of them are in a different place at the different scaling pathways and will need to determine their own intermediary role based on an understanding and engagement with the governments and multiple stakeholder platforms. Next, please. So while we promote these 4 restoration practices that I mentioned that directly target land degradation, we believe that only working with others to promote system change can be scaled sustainably. So this figure is from an article we did with Leonard and Maria on system change. So at CRS, we understand that really to catalyze transformational change at scales, we need to break out of traditional paradigms such as projects and programs. So as represented by this figure, by the iceberg, we really need to understand and address the root causes behind today's degradation crisis and events by looking at and changing the pattern structures and behaviors. Next, please. So some of the key elements of our scaling approach include building capacity and empowering local leadership. We talked about this multiple stakeholder platform, the core practices, supporting and catalyzing system change, and helping partners to leverage finance and linking to national and local goals. Next, please. And another key element of our approach is focused on building evidence, as we believe that is a critical entry point for collaboration and influence. And so most of last year's achievement was a result of direct CRS implementation, but we're also collecting data on activities we have done in collaboration with others. Next, please. So besides these global indicators, a lot of work have gone into defining and developing other indicators for influence, socioeconomic and particularly by physical impact. So result of that work is a set of indicators with corresponding protocols, data collection methodologies, and training materials that really can be applied across all CRS regional contexts. And yeah, there's a lot more to tell, but with that, I'll hand it over to Isan to give an example of the application of our overall approach to scaling in Lesotho. Thank you.
Thank you, Olaf. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. As Leonard introduced me, I'm Isan Rizvi. I'm with Catholic Relief Services and I'm based in Lesotho. And I must say that I'm very privileged to be part of this group today. And I hope that my presentation would give a glimpse of our work in scaling land restoration in Lesotho. The map you saw that Ola presented in one of his slides, Lesotho is a speck on the map. And we hope that this work really informs the work throughout the region. So Lesotho is an important country for Southern Africa region because it's a water tower for the region. And you can notice that a large number of our people in South Africa depend on Lesotho for water. A number of industries in the Gauteng province, they use water that is supplied through the network of dams in Lesotho to South Africa. Next slide. But Lesotho's status as a water tower to the region is threatened by rampant land degradation. Fast depleting natural resources not only threaten the livelihood of several million people in the region, it threatens the loss of revenue that Lesotho earns by selling water to its neighboring country. Currently, we are in negotiation to sell water to Botswana along with South Africa. Next slide. So to address this situation of land degradation, water loss, the heavy siltation and flash floods and degradation of other types of natural resources and their effect on the economy, the government of Lesotho, European Union, GIZ, CRS, and a couple of other institutions, they came together a couple of years back and they designed the project called Integrated Catchment Management. It's a national program, a multi-year program, and we are currently in the phase of implementing the pilot, trying to learn what works, what doesn't work, and how to scale the project to the country. Next slide, please. Currently, the Integrated Catchment Management project is being piloted in 6 sub-catchments. They are located in different agroclimatic zones. And we are actively engaged in producing evidences for successful watershed management approaches like linking soil and water conservation with improvements in the livelihood, climate smart agriculture, promoting ownership among the communities through promotion of engagement with the market. Then we are also looking at how farmer learning centers could be the agent of change in the communities, could impact the behavior change, could improve the services to the communities which are currently lacking. Next slide. At the heart of the Integrated Catchment Management Program is the scaling. So what we mean by scaling is as Olaf was talking about, a transformational change at scale, a paradigm shift, and in terms of taking the project from the project's approach to the approach where it becomes a movement, it becomes a part of everybody's life, from the government to the communities, and everybody works towards the integrated catchment management. Next slide. So we are currently engaged in developing the scaling strategy so that the pilot interventions, both at the community level and at the national level, can come together and can inform a program, a larger scale scaling strategy, which the program can adopt, and so that the scaling can happen. The program can be scaled in the 3 dimensions that we call like deep scaling, the horizontal and vertical scaling in the country. So strategy change platform, which Olaf talked about, talks about, provided us the opportunity to look at the scaling, and then we have this scaling model. Can you please go back to the last slide, the previous one? So at the helm of the scaling model, we have the technological innovation, which is tangible, which is more quantifiable and more can be experimented by the communities. And then we have a number of complementary innovations that are necessary for the success of the core innovation. And these innovations like learning and documentation, the planning process, and capacity building. Next slide, please. So the community groups in the communities in our watershed areas, which we call community watershed teams, these groups, what they do, they operationalize the scaling agenda. So they take up a number of plans that exist in the community, train the groups, natural resource user groups, to better plan to improve their planning processes around rangeland, around management of water sources, water supply, irrigation systems, even nutrition and women groups. And then they combine all these plans, and the idea is that these plans become the part of the community council plan, and community council plan are taken to the next level, where the decentralized system in Lesotho through the central government, the integrated catchment management plans are funded. Next slide. So if you look at the planning, so we are looking only at one complementary innovation in my presentation today. We are looking at how these plans that we facilitate at the community level, they get funded. And this is one of the most important cog in the machinery, in the scaling machinery. If this works well, a lot of other systems becomes very easy to change a lot of other systematic issues in the communities. So our community, through community visioning process, the ICM plans developed by community watershed teams are taken to the council, and council take them to the next level, which is district level, where they get financed. Next slide, please. So far, our CRS is working at the very grassroots level with community groups, with natural resource groups like herd boys, like the farmer groups, like the women groups, and we are experimenting with the technologies, with the strategies, and learnings are being documented, and we are preparing a ground at the community level for scaling, while GIZ is working with the national government, looking at the policies, looking at the other government systems, and trying to work out what systematic change is needed at the national level. And then we would bring these two scaling ideas together sometime in February, March, and see what actually the scaling at the program level would look like. That will help us to scale the program in nationwide. Next slide, please. So it is a 9-step process. We have completed 6 steps. And these 6 steps are like establishment of community watershed teams, then establishment of the catchment planning and support unit. So currently the project is being implemented by national NGOs, which are led by CRS, and these national NGOs who are good at natural resource management, who have experience. They are forming the community catchment planning and support units. And these support units are comprised of the extension workers, the various government officials from the various departments. And the idea is that soon the national NGOs will move out of the catchments, leaving behind the CPUs to continue supporting the communities in planning processes, in the implementation of their NRM or ICM plans. And then the CWTs will take these plans to the community council level. I think that's the one that is still pending. So we are looking at in future very soon that these community watershed plans would be dissected into small projects. CPU will help them to quantify these small projects, take them to the community council levels, and then to district level where these plans will be funded, and will continue monitoring the progress and supporting the communities. So that's all from my side for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olaf and Isham. Really nice how you show, and I know, Eshan, you feel strongly about this, that restoring land and other natural resources is just a means to an end and not the other way around, right? And without systemic change at scale, it's practically impossible to sustain and invest. And you're talking about the finance as well, let alone restore land at scale. Great. Questions from the audience? This is really a community event, so just pop up your hand or write something in the chat. I see already from Johannes a question. Can the presenter say a bit more about CRS moved from project to movement approach in terms of how CRS actually manages its support? Is it no longer time bound, beginning and resource constrained, or specific result oriented? All of which defines a traditional project approach. So what is it? How did they move from a project to this systems approach? And Olaf, I see you're coming up.
Yeah, I can answer that. I think that's a fantastic question. Thank you very much. Yeah, so that is of course a challenge, and I would say we probably combine the two. We are not going away from project and program intervention, but with this specific program, and so we actually have 6 platforms at CRS that addresses scaling with different thematic areas, and land restoration is one. So what we have done is, so those target countries that I talked about are countries where we have selected based on a series of criteria. One is that there's an existing strong anchor project that actually works on land restoration. That means that the country program and the staff has some capacity there, but most importantly, it's also a place where there is a commitment by the government to take land restoration forward. So that has been one of the reasons. So we are not investing as a platform. We are not setting up any projects. We are working through existing projects, and then we are trying to build evidence around a land restoration through that visibility that existing projects can have. And then we try to enter this convening intermediary role where we build coalitions and platforms around land restoration to take that to scale. And we do not, so we have a time limit, which is a strategy as a pilot, which is 10 years. And we do not have a fixed amount of resources, but we have the agency working to leverage resources. So for example, we can invest in research around land restoration, depending on the different contexts and depending on the different approaches. And then we can feed that research and that evidence into that collaboration with peers and with governments and other actors. And we also invest, for example, in communications campaigns around land restoration based on these anchor projects and based on these resources that we have to invest in strategic issues. So as such, you can say the platform is not a project in itself, but it relies on the visibility of existing products that we have, but it's long-term and it's not bound by any specific results for a specific country. So it's a bit of a mixture of the two.
Great question and great response. And this one is for Eshan. I'm trying to combine a few, which I may slip here, but anyway. So for Eshan, are these local groups, are they talking to each other? Are they sharing experiences with each other, or does that go through CRS? And another question also related to that is, okay, how important has been the environmental activities? Because as Frank said, mostly priorities on education and health and other things. How important is the environment in these kind of communities and the plans? And how was it compatible with what was there at national level, no? Government commitment, etc. Ashton, if you want to have a go at that one.
Very good questions. And I think these are the questions we have asked ourselves so many times, and we've been trying to get right answers. So for example, when we talk about CWTs, community watershed teams, so some of the catchments are big. So some catchments are like, for example, 625 square kilometer of an area. And this is, you will find multiple agroclimatic zones, topography changes. So you have many community watershed team in a given catchment. So what we have, every catchment has a hub, and this hub is run by the government itself. So the government has a unit which is comprised of the different directors from the different departments, for example, Ministry of Forestry, Food Security, Agriculture, and all that. And it's called ICU. It's not a good acronym, but it's called ICU, Integrated Catchment Management Coordination Unit. And they have hubs in each catchment. And hub is led by a government-funded position called Catchment Manager. This Catchment Manager is the one that brings the different NGOs, different departments together, and brings the different community watershed teams together. So they meet on the weekly basis, they discuss the agenda, they manage their expectations, like upstream, downstream expectations are managed, progress is discussed, and what support, technical support is needed is also discussed, and those kind of issues come, discussed. So hub is an entity that continues to fuel in that energy that is required to continue supporting the CWTs. We play a role of a facilitator only, as Olaf was saying. We bring in the systems, we train them, we bring in the ideas and help them to think through. And while we are there are no handouts. We don't provide any cash for soil and water conservation work. We don't provide any fees for services. Rather, these are led by the government. So that's one thing. The second question was focusing on, Leonard, can you please?
I think that's about how do you engage them in the environment? I mean, mostly health education gets priority,
That's true.
Maybe you can link that also to that community level, but how do you link that community level to national goals? Now, that's another question I think that you see that goes beyond the community, right? Forestry percentages, etc. So maybe with that question, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So at the community level, when I was talking about the council action plans, so council, before ICM came through, most of the council plans will talk about roads, schools, and health facilities. Those you will find were the common things that community council would plan. What we have done, the CWTs, through the CPUs, community planning units, we have trained them on natural resource management. So this is CRS 5 skill sets that we talk about. So one of the skill is group management. Then you have the SILK, the saving, microfinance-led savings, then natural resource management, innovation, and marketing. So we have been training, we are forming these support units in each catchment, bringing different government stakeholders, forming these groups, training them, giving them the skills, and taking these groups while we are working with the community watershed teams, helping them to understand natural resource management. So this is the third skill set, which talks about understanding your natural resources. So now when the communities understand natural resources, for example, they do transect walks, they do look at the issues around land degradation, they start appreciating what in which environment they live. And you will see they are prioritizing things like land resting for natural regeneration. They're prioritizing now the farmer managed natural regeneration. And this is happening at the community level. So things are changing, mindsets are changing, community priorities are changing when it comes to planning. At the national level, through GIZ and through the ICU, we are promoting the importance of ICM, the Integrated Catchment Management, land restoration, among the different ministries. So we are bringing these ministers together to talk about it. So there is one entity called NTS, National Technical Secretariat, and there is a steering committee. And the job of these two entities is to help promote environmental actions and climate change related actions at the government level.
Okay, thank you so much. In the interest of time, we have to move on. I think there are still a lot of questions that can also be answered in the chat. And otherwise, I think maybe Eshan and all of you can also put your email address there so that they can contact you directly. But I think some of them you can answer just straight on the chat. But thanks, Eshan and Olaf. Let's move to the Evergreening Alliance. And for those of you that joined the Zoom like 10 minutes early, you had a look into the kitchen, and we had some last minute changes. So we had a presentation of John Dixon. I think John Dixon is very famous. Everybody knows him. He's been working all around the world on agricultural research and development, worked at CIMMYT, ACIR, etc. And he's the head of the scaling working group of the Evergreening Alliance. But the video that we got is really, the sound was not good enough to play here. So Bob Winterbottom, he worked with the World Resources Institute Global Restoration Initiative, support the launch of the AFR 100 African Restoration Initiative. He said, okay, I will do the presentation for you. So that's really great of him. He will be supported by Peter Goebbels. He's the co-founder of Groundswell International, and he has lived and worked in West Africa for over 30 years, and he's actually calling in from Ghana. Also, his internet was not super good. So thank you so much, Bob, for taking this up on such a last minute. And yeah, the floor is yours. I think Maria is projecting your presentation. So yeah, go ahead. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you, Leonard. Thank you, Maria, for helping with the slides. And yeah, I'll just extend the apologies. Leonard mentioned John Dixon. He's in Australia, so in the middle of the night there, and that's why he had tried to record the presentation. Yeah, that hasn't worked. But John has been a real mover and shaker in the Global Evergreening Alliance. He is very active in our Council of Fellows and several working groups, and as Leonard mentioned, quite a background, and has had a key role in presenting and developing these guidelines that we want to talk about. They were actually authored first by Mel Landers and by Peter Goebbels, so it's great that Peter's also going to be able to join us for the discussion. I'll just give a few words of sort of background and context, and then move quickly to share with you some of the key principles that emerged in this this document. Next slide, please, Maria. We can go on. There we go. Yeah. So the idea is for you. I'll get to it in a minute. What the Global Evergreening Alliance is, but we're all working in this context of very complex and uncertain, not only climate change, but the widespread degradation that's led to a lot of interest and a lot of support for landscape level restoration. Of course, continuing chronic entrenched poverty that we've been struggling against for decades, but that's persistent. And sort of all of these interacting in larger systems areas. We talked earlier about the need for system level changes, and we recognize there are some tipping points, both for negative and positive. So that was sort of in our minds as we thought about, how are we going to address this, and came to do many things that your community of practice has already been thinking about on scaling. Next slide, please. We recognized in the Global Evergreening Alliance that while these challenges are huge, and we have to have a lot of ambition to really get on top of these persistent problems of poverty and continuing and deepening degradation, accelerated by climate change and so on, that it's not a blank slate that we're working with. We know where there's been cases of nature-based solutions that have actually taken hold and gone to scale. For example, the case of farmer-managed natural regeneration in the West African Sahel, particularly in Niger. We've seen how with minimal continuing sort of project by project assistance, that things can sort of take off and you can have behavior change at scale. And that it can be behavior change that leads to transformational outcomes that begin to address those big challenges that we're talking about, making people less vulnerable to climate change, improving their food security, boosting their incomes, and so on. So the challenge is, how do you shift from business usual, what we've been doing, to sort of really get a handle on achieving these major outcomes that by scaling up solutions that do exist. Next slide, please. This is just an illustration. You know, it's not necessarily immediate, but over a period of more than a decade, from 2002 to 2019 in the Gorky region of Senegal, after a cross visit, farmers being exposed to this idea with a little bit of help from a World Vision project, some capacity building, some extension work. This idea of this practice of farmer-managed natural regeneration really began to take hold and just spread and spread, and is on tens of thousands of hectares. That's documented, by the way, in a new publication some of you may be familiar with from Tropenbos, Restoring African Drylands, and we'll put a link to it in the chat to get to it. Next slide, please. So just a word about the Global Evergreening Alliance. Some of you may be familiar. It was quite active. The Alliance was well represented at the last COP in Scotland. But it has about 60 members, international NGOs, World Resources Institute, and others, ICRAF. It has a secretariat based in Australia. There's a number of fellows. I noticed Mike McGay's on the call, myself, John Dixon, Peter, we're all fellows of the Global Evergreening Alliance, and come together as Council of Fellows, and we welcome to hear of interest in others that want to be part of this effort. We have different working groups, and one, as much as your community of practice is you know, what can we do to be more effective in scaling? Another one's forming up on the issues of capacity building and so on. And the Alliance is supporting different restoration activities, particularly in Australia. There's an effort underway, Restore Australia, trying to achieve restoration at scale there, and John Dixon's playing a key role in that. And several activities in Africa, and some of you might be familiar, Regreening Africa, particularly in East Africa, and some in East and West Africa. And we have this global campaign, which if you go to the Global Evergreening Alliance website, you can learn all about that global campaign. Next slide, please. That global, next slide. Thank you, Maria. The campaign is called Green Up to Cool Down. Next slide. Am I still being heard? Maybe we have a glitch.
Yeah, we hear you, but I don't see the screen is not moving. Maria, you're able to...
The next slide was going to be talking about the targets of the global campaign, I think. There we go. It aims to sequester 20 billion tons of CO2 annually by the year 2050, and to massively scale up these local successes. So, as I said, there's sort of 6 major objectives, much like the CRS effort. You know, we're sort of working on the issue of agroforestry. We're working in different areas to achieve this overall sequestration of 20 billion tons of CO2, but it's not only applying nature-based solutions and not only working on restoration, but doing it in a way that really employs those nature-based solutions to do carbon capture and sequestration in a way that just doesn't offset all of those carbon emissions, but really massively scales up the amount of carbon sequestered above and beyond just slowing down the emissions through less deforestation and so on. So we wanted to figure out now how, with these tremendous ambitious goals, how are we going to achieve that? So the scaling working group identified a number of principles and drafted this field practitioner scaling guideline. And that's what we want to talk about in the few remaining minutes we have. Yes, next slide. As I say, this is a document that was prepared by the fellows and others that came together and said, well, we know a little something. And in fact, it's not necessarily been a small project here and there, but where we've seen these transformational outcomes at scale, it's often because of, you know, there's different principles that emerge from that. And let's see if we can't sort of learn, take those lessons and begin to document them. And what happened in this document is we distilled some 12 principles that we'll present now. The first is a change in mindset. So we're really not talking about just going out and more inputs provided by a project to generate a few more outputs that are tracked by the monitoring system, but it's really engaging people that are the key stakeholders, the people that are doing the actions that either could lead to the negative outcomes or the positive outcomes that we want, and changing mindsets at that level. And doing it with participatory systems that are really focusing on empowering and connecting with these communities and that are informed by diagnostic and stock taking, sort of understanding what's going on in the system and what needs to change and how. And we also recognize that if we really want to have transformational outcomes at scale, you need to sort of have a big vision and be thinking, you know, where you want to get to. And instead of just doing a 5-year project planning horizon, sort of think beyond that to say, wow, what are these major outcomes? And then you begin to back into sort of, okay, and where are we today? And what's an entry point that we could use? And to invest not just in sort of project by project sort of area development programs, but in scaling programs that are have identified the more strategic interventions that are needed to begin to change those mindsets, to begin to enable that participation, to begin to empower people. And it's all informed by these diagnostic stock-taking efforts and sort of learning from those successes. Next slide, please. A few more principles that emerged is to identify tipping points, because we really want to, again, not just sort of incrementally implement a specific project and go, you know, 50 hectares this year, 100 hectares next year, and 50 hectares each year until you reach your goal of a few hundred hectares. But we want that exponential tipping point for to sort of see what can be done if our interventions can really click that off, trigger that catalytic, very explosive almost growth and adoption of those practices or changes in behavior or whatever we think is going to lead to the outcomes we need or we'd like to see. And focus on the context-specific scaling processes. That may be a capacity building effort, a communication effort, or other particular things that we think are feeding into the scaling process. A seventh is to encourage local and national supporting institutions. We recognize that it's not just those farmers that they operate on the basis of incentives, and they work within a context, institutional, policy-wise, fiscal incentives, and so on. And we need to be thinking about that. Market access, that's the next one. Ensuring value chains for key input outputs, including carbon and other environmental services. Next slide. I think we just got one more set of principles. To clarify the incentives, again, we're talking about behavior change, so that's driven by incentives often. So what needs to change at the level of the perceptions and the realities that farmers and other stakeholders face. Identify value-adding integration, recognizing that, you know, we may be wanting to get more trees in the landscape, but how do the trees interact with the cropping systems, with the animal resources and grazing and so on, and what's going on in the overall land use, and how does all that come together in a way that can positively and synergistically interact. And finally, arrange for regular participatory monitoring and community learning, which is kind of related to the following. The last one, invest in local technical and socioeconomic competencies, leadership and networking. So as we've mentioned before, capacity building is a big effort. And if you want to empower, enable people, we need to be learning, developing those competencies, and also have those monitoring systems in place. And I think this is the final slide. So just a word on this scaling group that the Global Evergreening Alliance has in place. It's mainly fellows. We've got this document. It's a living document. We It's right now being reviewed at the level of the Secretariat by their Strategic Advisory Committee, and me having some tweaks, but I hope that soon it'll be accessible to any and all interested persons. We want to, again, make that available as a living document and continue to add annexes and link it to documentation that your community of practice has, and so on. We would like to support more capacity building. As I was saying, we recognize that's a key one, and there's different working groups going on at the country's level where the Alliance is working. And we'd like to develop some scaling briefs for further themes, whether they're more focused on the policy, more focused on the investment. And in fact, maybe as we get into the questions and answers, Peter could say a word about vertical versus other kinds of scaling, and the institutional parts versus working directly with the stakeholders on the ground. But again, the intent is to just whet your appetites for taking a deeper look at this scaling document, and to benefit from your questions, your comments, and to have a good discussion about some of those principles that we share. Thank you, Leonard.
No, thank you so much, Bob and Peter, and also John, for making this presentation.
Yes.
Really great. I'm trying to weave in a comment and a question in one, so bear with me. So I think you talk about the principles, and I just want to say here that also the community of practice, I just copy pasted a link to the principles that were developed by the community of practice, and there's more to come, but that's something also maybe the Evergreening Alliance can look at. Well, one of the things that stood out for me there is that the ninth one is about incentives for farmers and smallholders, and I think the question that Andrea asks is related to that. What are the incentives, or what are the arguments, the winning arguments maybe, or the incentives for people along the value chain? There's maybe value chain actors or decision makers, etc., that are not the farmers, to support the scaling. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I can ask this question to Peter. Peter, if your connection is good and if you're there. Ah, there you are. Hi, great to see you, Peter. Thanks. You want to take that up? You're muted, Peter. Maybe I should. I'm not sure, Peter, you're muted, and I'm asking you to unmute via Zoom, but I don't see any change. Maybe Bob, you want to start, and then when Peter can jump in once he managed to unmute.
So if the question is about how to, in practical ways, how to clarify incentives or give more positive incentives to encourage adoption of these practices that contribute to the scaling, the restoration outcomes at scale. Well, take the case of farmers. A lot of countries, the forestry departments have typically been responsible for what goes on with trees. And although their focus has been on protecting remaining natural forests, the legislation that operates nationally, oftentimes there's severe penalties for cutting or managing trees, really, particularly so-called high-valued species. And so if a farmer has trees on his land, and if he wants to incorporate those in his cropping system because he recognizes they're fixing nitrogen, they're providing fodder, organic green matter, and so on, if the forestry department person is fining him every time he wants to manage that tree, and or if when he comes time it's mature and he wants to sell the pole and add to his income, he's taxed or has problems again dealing with the Forest Service as he tries to market his wood. Those are huge disincentives. So a lot of the if we want farmers to do a better job of managing the natural resources, they need to have more secure tenure, more secure rights over those. So that's a major incentive. Easier access to markets with less problems of corruption and illegal permits and fines and things that detract from their profit margin. Also, maybe helping them organize producer groups to, again, reinforce the economic incentives because they're more quality control and there's value-added transformation. All of those things have been used in different projects. There's experience along those lines of how to increase the incentives or how to reduce the disincentives. And those are just things we wanted to flag as important to address.
Okay. Thanks,
Yeah,
Peter. You want to come
Leonard,
in?
can
I
I?
see you're
Yeah.
alive now. Go ahead.
I'm alive again. Yeah, I think there's incentives at different levels, and I want to focus more on the community level or the territorial level. First and foremost, since it's participatory, communities themselves and individual households have to see the benefits, the likely benefits that will motivate them to engage in a process of land restoration. And those benefits are not necessarily mitigation of climate change. There are drought or whatever that they can cope with that. And so the initial work of incentives need to be at the community level, and farmers need to define themselves what they're looking for land restoration, and then we try to deepen that process. So I think there are many types of benefits, and I want to really emphasize something that Bob mentioned in the presentation. It's very context specific. What will work in one area of the country and one agro ecosystem will not work in another. So what we are scaling is not a set of techniques, the evergreening techniques, or land restoration techniques. It's a process by which communities engage and have a sense of ownership because of what they see as the benefits to them, that they actually do a lot of the management and driving and the spreading. There won't be enough government agents, no matter what country you're in, to scale it. It has to be farmer to farmer and community to community. And a lot of the facilitation work that's done within the evergreening is in building those relationships and that capacity based on the incentives that farmers themselves look at and see what the benefits are. It's a whole other set of issues about what incentives government can provide to enhance or facilitate or create conditions by which this can be done.
All right, thanks. I think one question that also resonates a lot with Kate's comment is, it looks like the problem of land degradation is kind of scaling faster than the solutions, right, globally. What are the kind of incentives for land degradation that you are up against? I mean, Kate is writing very nicely. She say, incentives maybe to be better than the status quo. The solution has to be more attractive than the problem. What kind of incentives are there for land degradation that you're kind of fighting at that global level as an organization?
Well, speaking from the context of the Sahel, West Africa, where I have the most experience, and it varies from place to place. Farmers used to be able to maintain their land and their natural resource base through traditional fallowing. Once the land became tired, they would move on and switch to other land, and maybe 10 years before they get back to that initial parcel. And that's how they maintain soil fertility and land for generations. Now with rapid population growth, the need for more cash, increasing food insecurity, there's a need for more cash. They will resort to things like charcoal burning. Those are the sort of drivers of land degradation. I would add to that many of the more modern green revolution types of farming, which have a lot of emphasis on fertilizers, which acidify the soil and which are misused, and agrochemicals, which really deteriorate the biology of the soils, are another factor, and that is being promoted, and cash crops like cotton as well, which do harm to the environment. So those are just in my environment here, in this context, some of the drivers that lead to systems that really degrade the soil. But it's possible, as Robert has said, to reverse that. And I used to be very discouraged until about 10 years ago when I saw what FMNR as sort of the lead evergreening process could do to actually not just slow down the degradation, but to stop it and reverse it. And it is possible. And now we're trying to scale that.
Right. Great. So I think if people are kind of like encouraged by your presentations and your approach, and I can really only support that, because I know that there's a scaling group within the Evergreening Alliance, but there's also a group on movement building and on mindset change. So really, I think those kind of issues that CRS also highlights as being very important. And you have groups on that as well. So I think that's really great. Can people join you? Can they? How can they join you? Let's say.
Yes, but I'll let Bob speak to that. He's been there longer than I. Bob?
Thanks, Peter.
Sure, Peter, into the group. Yes, the Global Evergreening Alliance would welcome, expressions of interest. I believe CRS is already a member, and ICRAF, WRI, many organizations. So at the level of becoming a partner or just organizations themselves, speak to the Secretariat and join the alliance. It's an alliance, it's a global alliance. There's opportunities for individuals, as I said, through the Council of Fellows. Contact me or Peter or John Dixon, or Dennis Garrity is the chairman of the board, and he's very well connected. And so questions about, how can I become part of what the alliance is doing could directly be addressed to Dennis Garrity, or Sebastian Matthews is now sort of heading up the global campaign, Green Up to Cool Down. So all that information is available if you poke around a little bit on the Global Evergreening Alliance website. I just wanted to go back for a minute, and all together, I think we can really make things happen in a way that hasn't before. Peter may want to speak to this as well, but we're firmly convinced that business as usual is not going to get us there. Neither is a trillion trees trying to plant just more trees. We've really got to think more deeply and profoundly about what has to change in the way we're doing projects, what has to be funded that hasn't been funded to date in different ways. And it comes back to this point of, why is land degradation going and outpacing really the efforts to restore land? We have more and more political commitment to restore more and more ambitious, or to reach more and more ambitious restoration targets, but the degradation continues and arguably faster. But we're getting better tools on that. That's been a sort of a deficiency. The WRIs, the Global Forest Watch, many other tools are out there. We're getting better tools to measure carbon stocks. We're getting better tools, to put in the hands of communities that are participating. That may be another way to incentivize, is to sort of put them more in charge of saying, to the extent that we sequester more carbon, this is going to directly reward us or something. If they get a title to those carbon, or the carbon financing, the credits, there's a whole lot of work that can be done there. But a big part, I think, is that so many of the projects in the past that have sort of said, well, we're going to take off this little bite and try to restore, this 10,000 hectares or this 50,000 hectares or this watershed or whatever, but they haven't really been able to simultaneously work with communities and then step back and begin to address those root causes, the real drivers of degradation, which are often in terms of national policies or in terms of needed institutional reforms or policy reforms, or even, the way that projects, major international development finance is set up and done. We took a close look at the SAWAP program of the World Bank and GEF, and there were some major issues there that prevented them from doing restoration at scale in a way that also addressed the root causes of degradation. But maybe enough said there.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Peter and Bob, really for jumping in last minute to take over from John. It's 10 o'clock here in Mexico. Thank you so much. Both of you talked about local leadership, community-based solutions, mindset changes, movements versus projects. I think maybe one key word is there, it's collaboration at all these levels, right? Also with people that are on the ground and not on the ground. I think really great. Thank you so much. Olaf and John have been long-term members of the community of practice, and this year we tried to give a bit more attention to those members that we have. I think the previous years we had kind of like external people come in and present, and I think we have so many great members among our community of practice. So the next session will be again the last Thursday of the month. Every month we start, and that will be with Kate Veilenberg. You saw some of her comments already, and she's going to report on success factors for scaling from her analysis of the USAID Development Innovation Ventures program. Probably also some inspiration for principals at all levels. And Colin Christensen, who's also on the call, great to have you, from 1 Acre Fund, on what actually are the implications of layering climate adaptation on ongoing programs, and what are the implications for scaling. So that's on the 24th of February. It will be moderated by Mark Huizinga from USAID. So we are also circulating our moderation, so you don't have to look at me all the time. So I think for this part of the session, we are done. We talked about land restoration and scale. Now we have another additional 15 minutes or so for those who want to stick around, hopefully all of you, to talk a little bit more about the community, the scaling community, and kind of like issues that you want to hear more about, or issues that you think, okay, I would like to present about that. So yeah, so thank you for this part. Everybody's welcome to stay on, and then let's just move on to this second part. So yeah, like I said, we had a big annual meeting in November, and one of the things that came out there is that, okay, we still like to hear more from our members. Really see, okay, how can the community of practice serve your needs best, and how can we also, I don't know, create some of these links and connections between all of you. I mean, CRS and Evergreening, I think a lot of people were interested in this. Let's see if we can keep doing that. No? So we set up a Menti, and I think that's all Maria's work, of course. Thank you so much. Maybe Maria, are you putting the Menti in the chat? I'm not seeing the chat now. And one of the questions, so I think, well, once you do that, everybody can participate, but you can already start thinking about, you can already go to www.menti.com and then click this code 78180312. And the question is the first, we have two questions. No? So the first question, again, what would you like to learn and discuss more about? And the second question is going to be, okay, what can you offer? No? So what are the topics, issues, or trends that you would like to learn and discuss more about in the ARD working group? Just to say also that we have now monthly meetings, so we have quite a lot of interaction. We have already a full program for February, and I think March is also filling up already, but we still have some slots over the year that we could use with you. Let me just put Menti in here. Yeah, just let me know if you're getting in. I think not, because I think then we should see something moving here, right? So if you click on the menti.com here, the link that I just sent, and copy paste that code, you can start writing something. There is already some. Carbon credit solutions, finance, blockchain restoration, promising farming practices, climate change, successful scaling models, small scale irrigation, changing behaviors. Does anyone want to say something about what he or she put there? Just unmute and say your thoughts on this, or elaborate a little bit on what you wrote.
Leonard, maybe I can just say something. for my presentation, I'll definitely get into the carbon financing question. So if that's really interesting to folks, I can lean more heavily into that, to your point that I should probably focus on a more narrow set of things.
Well, you're really combining things, Colin. Great. That's great. You see, the people are already being served. Yeah, I think that would be great. I don't know who put the carbon credit solutions there, or somebody wants to elaborate a little bit on that. Carbon financing is also there. Anybody who put something on carbon?
Leonard? Yeah,
Yes.
sorry. I include carbon financing, but also carbon credits, and how, are this experience working in Latin America or Africa or Asia, but and how it's being managed by farmers, and the level of participation of private sector. I hear some, experiences from Brumitra, who is working with carbon credits, and, but many of the data and information is not really well managed by farmers. So we are interested in seeing how it's worked and successful experience or lesson learned about it.
I think, Colin, this is really matches fantastic, huh?
Well, yeah, I would say I think I'm going to probably raise more questions than give answers. But,
Wow.
but yeah, maybe after we can see where else we could go with that conversation after I at least can start a discussion, because what we're doing is very much at the pilot stage.
Okay. Anybody else? Many people put climate change. Is there any ideas on how that can be integrated? Somebody wants to share? Just open your mic and talk. How can we integrate climate change better into the working group sessions? Normally the people are not so shy. Remember, our members are not so shy. Today they may be. I see Johannes, you're unmuted.
Right, Leonard. I mean, just to remind that we're at the community level, meaning the scaling community practice level. We're working on a number of cross-cutting issues, including the principles which have been mentioned you mentioned in the chat room. And I would think it would be wonderful if the working group could pick up on some of these issues we're working on: principles, institutionalization, mainstreaming, scaling into donor practices, systems versus scaling, and so on, and see how they play out in the context of the agricultural development sphere. And in a sense, tailor those community-wide sort of approaches to the specific needs and experiences of your working group. So I would just suggest that as you formulate your program going ahead, that you keep an eye on what we're doing in the community of practice, because your experience, your input in turn is going to be extremely valuable to us at the community-wide level. So let me just throw that in. Thank you.
Yeah, I think along those lines also a lot on the role of donors. No, I think we have this major topic of mainstreaming within scaling within the donor communities. I think we had a fantastic session also last November on that, so that's also on the website, and maybe we can pick it up also in the agricultural group. Olaf.
Oh, yes, thank you, Leonard. Yeah, so one thing I was thinking about and coming out of the questions as well is this this question around capacities. So I think you can we talk about two levels of capacities. One could be so what are we actually doing in terms of building capacity for scaling, but also and more importantly, what are the skills and competencies needed to go from product and program implementation to scaling, because that's something that we're dealing with is a completely different set of skills and capacities. So do we have any any studies or anything around that could be presented, so we have something tangible that we can take to the country programs and gradually, because it's not something you do overnight, but we can gradually build those capacities to better scale.
Capacity to scale, yeah, very nice. So maybe this can also be inspiration for the next question. Maria, can you put the next question up? So this is about your previous one. Okay, what would you like? And then the other one. Okay, what do you give to your country? Right. That kind of thinking. So what experience or event would you like to share with the ARD working group? So, I mean, we're also talking about maybe events like conferences or workshops, or even issues that your organization is working on. Maybe they're doing some scaling, mainstreaming that you want to highlight, or maybe that you need some support with something that you want maybe other members to know about, or this issue maybe about the carbon. Yeah, what would you like to share? You know, we have slots of for presentations, but like I said, there's also other things that you can just share. We have a newsletter also that you can think of, but yeah, I will stop talking and maybe just write what comes up in your mind. And I think the previous one was quite inspirational. No? Yeah. Okay. Institutionalization experiences. Yeah. Success stories. Yeah, that's going to be a nice one in February with Kate and Colin. They're already talking to each other to combine it in a way that it makes sense. Okay, there's a Data Association conference in Malawi. Relevant research, yes. Okay, I think that's something where on the website we started that, but I think we can do much more because there's a lot of good stuff coming on, especially how it links to systems change, right? Okay, it's moving. Linking supply to demand to scale. How about the joint event IRE and the climate working group? Yes. Farah and others scaled soil initiative for Africa. Maybe that's interesting. Who can somebody speak about that Farah initiative? All the others are also interesting, of course. But maybe.
Hi, this is Judy. I wrote that thing about.
Hi,
Farah.
Judy. Hi, great to see you.
And we're certainly not ready to present, but we're working hard on it with Farah and many others, including CRS. And you will be tapped, Leonard, as well. But we're not ready to present. We're just trying to learn so that we actually launch it. It will be following the principles at scale. So
great.
So good. Anybody
Okay.
with insights into that, please just get a hold of me, Judy Payne.
Judy, you want to put your email address in the chat?
Sure.
I think that would be great. Okay. Yes, that tipping points. I think that was one that also stuck with me. I think Bob, you mentioned those tipping points, right? Maybe more examples of that, and maybe that whole systems change language that's being used there now. Again, also, I think what came up today, how to leverage projects for wider movements and institutional change. Okay, good stuff. Somebody wants to highlight a bit on that tipping points, what they were thinking about there.
Hello, my name is Benjamin, and I put that in the Menti. And I'm curious about specific examples. I know we're all looking for that tipping point, and it's a challenge to know sometimes when it's been reached, or because there's always more things we could do, obviously. So maybe thinking about some greater commonalities of knowing when one hits that tipping point, and how we anchor our programs in a way that once that tipping point is reached, they're designed to be embedded and anchored within the system. Yeah.
Anybody get some inspiration from that, or thinks, okay, maybe I have something on the tipping points in this group? Because I think it's been one of the standard things you say about scaling. We scale until a tipping point and then everything will be fine. But yeah, there's very little literature that I've seen on that. No, anybody there's something to share there, or? No, okay.
Not now, I'd be happy to work with others to maybe pull in some different ideas on this, if that's of interest. Because I do
Yeah.
think the more it's built into program design, the easier it is to anchor. You know, we should design scale to in the end be anchored.
Yeah, I know that the CISA project in Southeast Asia took that really as their basis for their scaling strategy, these tipping points. And maybe I can connect you with Tim Krupnik on that. Or maybe we should do that together, because I would also like to learn more about that.
Great, let's learn together.
Okay, great. Okay, I think our time is also up. I think this has been great. Maybe somebody else still has a burning comment wants to make. Maybe that could be the last one. Anybody wants to speak up or raise their hand?
Leonard, just a
yes,
quick
please.
comment on the tipping points. Oftentimes, I think there's something to do with sort of enabling peer-to-peer learning, when folks don't need to sort of wait on somebody to organize a training for them, but they feel enabled and go out and sort of share something with their neighbor who shares with their neighbor, or with one group with another group. But this sort of when peer-to-peer learning begins to really catch, because of what's embedded in the learning in terms of how it can transform people's lives, people pay attention, and when it's sort of can be done peer-to-peer, it can really be taken off, and sort of that brush fire can be ignited, I think, by good investments in communication. And with all that's going on in social media and things like that, maybe there's something there to be investigated about how we do a better job of identifying, recognizing, encouraging those sorts of things, facilitating them.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. Okay, I think I'm going to close this meeting now. Thank you all for, well, about 70% stayed on for this internal kind of meeting. We're having a newsletter coming up soon. So if you want to contribute also to that newsletter, I think you have to reach out to Johannes Lin. I think we had some ideas already coming up. That's great. We in the chairs of the working group will look at your suggestions and then see how we can integrate that or weave them into the next coming sessions, or see how we can also link maybe to events like Johannes was saying at the community of practice level that are being dealt with. Especially this mainstreaming with donors is a hot topic at that level, where probably there's a lot of learnings there. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you, Maria, for only really the back support, the back office support. Thanks Bob for jumping in last minute, Peter for joining all the way from Ghana, and of course Olaf and Ishan for their work in the preparations of this. Next one is 24th of February with Colin and Kate. That's going to be fireworks, and looking forward to that. Okay, thank you so much. Really great to see you all, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thank you, Leonard.
Gracias.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Leonard. Great
Gracias.
job.